Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to introduce you to the food groups and basically do a bit of an introduction to food and what is it and why do we need it. So let's start with that. We've got this lovely picture of a food pyramid here, lots of lovely food there. But why do we need food? We eat often because we enjoy it, we like the taste of things. But why do we actually need to eat? Well, basically we eat for a couple of reasons. Firstly, for energy. We need energy to keep moving, to keep us warm, to basically do all the things we do. And even if you were just to lie flat in bed all day, your body actually consumes still a lot of energy keeping warm and just maintaining itself, keeping your heart beating, your lungs breathing, all those sorts of things. The other reason we need food, building blocks. Building blocks for growth and repair. So lots of you guys are still growing, and you need some material to actually, build the new parts of your body out of. We're constantly replacing parts of our body. We're constantly replacing things like our skin and our blood cells because they wear out. And to replace them, again, we need some sort of material and energy to essentially make those parts of our body out of. So we need food for energy, to keep moving, keep us warm, those sorts of things, and as a building block for growth and repair. Food groups. So there are three major chemical food groups. Now if you look in a textbook or something, it might say 4 or 5. These are the three major ones we're going to cover. The other ones that are included, sometimes people include water as well. Our bodies are primarily made out of water, and we definitely need to drink to keep our bodies hydrated. But I don't know if I'd call that a food. The other one is vitamins and minerals. They're things that we need to keep healthy and to keep our bodies running. But again, I don't know if I'd quite consider them a food because they're something we need very small amounts of. But they're not sort of something you wouldn't sit down and sort of eat a bowl of them. So we will cover those a little bit later, maybe in the next tutorial. But the three major food groups that we're going to focus on are these: carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats and oils, and protein. So firstly, lipids. Let's start with this one. Lipids are basically what you guys would often call fats. They're mainly we use them for storing energy. So fat is mainly found in animals under the skin. And that's basically so in us and humans, that's where we store any excess energy. So if you eat too much, if you get too much energy, you'll store the extra as fat just under the skin. So there are two types of lipids: fats, which are solid, and in most animals we store our lipids as fats. They're solid at room temperature. And the other form is oils. Oils are liquid at room temperature, and plants tend to sometimes store energy or have these oils in them. So foods that are kind of rich in lipids are things like butter and cheese and cream, meat. Meat is quite high in fat. Meat has a lot of protein in it, which is quite good for us, but it also has a lot of fat, and a lot of us eat probably more meat than we need to or than we should, and it's that fat that's maybe not so good for us. Anything that's kind of deep fried, obviously it's soaked up a lot of the oil, is also going to be high in fat. So if you're asked in a test or something for an example of something that's got lots of lipids in it, or that's rich in lipids, just think of any food that you would call fatty. So just remember, lipids is actually the name for this group of fats and oils. Fats are the solid ones, oils are the liquid ones, and that's at room temperature. If you put them in the freezer, they'll probably all go solid, and if we heat them up, they tend to all go liquid. Lipids, what are they made out of? So lipids are made out of these chemical groups. Two types of chemical groups: glycerol, so that's the red one here, glycerol, which sticks to 3 fatty acids. And the fatty acids can be slightly different lengths and shapes. And you'll learn more about that when you go into the senior levels. But all you need to know is that lipids are made out of glycerol and fatty acids. So that's basically it. We're not going to look too much at what glycerol actually is and what fatty acids are, or what they're comprised out of. They're just the chemical components out of which lipids are made. So we'll leave it at that. So lipids made out of a glycerol, which has 3 fatty acids stuck to it. And this is important when we come to digestion. We'll look at this again, because when we digest lipids, when we break them down in our stomach, and in our duodenum, well, we'll look at that in a bit later, basically the lipids will be broken down into glycerol and fatty acids, so they'll be split apart. Alright, protein. So protein, why do we need protein? Well, you can use protein as an energy source, but it's not a very good energy source, and basically we tend to get enough energy from these other groups. So proteins are what we use as a material or a building block, and often for growth and repair we need a lot of protein. Proteins are actually the moving, working parts of our cells. So our bodies are made out of these tiny things called cells. The cells are the smallest parts of us that we would still call living. So we are basically about 1 trillion cells all stuck together, a few different types of cells, all doing different jobs and working together to make us who we are. And inside those cells are these chemicals, these proteins, and they're the moving, working parts. So our cells, if they were like an office building, the proteins would be the workers inside them. Or if the cell was a machine, the proteins would be the gears and cogs and the bits that actually move and do things, the machinery. So yeah, proteins are kind of like the little molecular machines inside our cells that make them run. So we need to obviously make new proteins when we make new cells. We're constantly making proteins. One protein you may have heard of is hemoglobin. It's what carries blood, oxygen in our blood. But there's thousands of different proteins in our body that all do different jobs, and each of our cells have hundreds of different proteins all doing different things to make them work properly. So we eat protein. There's a lot of protein in things like meat and eggs and cheese and nuts. We eat them, and we actually break down those proteins into their pieces, and we use those pieces, we reassemble them into the proteins we need to keep us running. So our muscles have a lot of protein in them as well. They're basically, our muscles are the meat. When we eat meat if we eat beef, that's meat off a cow, it's basically the muscle off a cow. Muscle has a lot of protein in it because it needs to contract, and that contraction is based on on those proteins working together to make it contract. So if you look here, proteins are made out of amino acids. So amino acids are a chemical group, and again, we're not going to look at too much detail at that yet. You'll learn more about those at the senior level. But an amino acid is a small chemical group, and there are different types of amino acids. So there are 20 different types of amino acids, and they can be assembled in any kind of different combination to make different proteins. So a protein is a long chain, probably about 300-400, maybe even more amino acids in a long chain make up a protein. So you can see here basically this protein here, if we eat this protein, we'll break it down into these pieces, into these amino acids, and we'll use these amino acids, we'll assemble them maybe in a different combination to make our own protein. We'll piece them together into a chain, and that will be a protein inside us that has some sort of function, does something inside our cells. So there are 20 different amino acids that we need to make our proteins, and that's one of the reasons again why a healthy diet is a varied diet, because we need to make sure we're getting all those 20 amino acids. There's a few of those our body can make itself as long as we're getting some other form of food, but some of them we actually can't make ourselves, and so we need to have some protein in our diet to make sure we have some of those amino acids. So we break down the proteins into its amino acids, and we reassemble those into our own proteins, the proteins that run around doing the different jobs in our cell. So foods rich in protein, think of meat, egg whites, and milk are things that are really good, that are really high in protein. Okay, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are another type of food, and we mainly use carbohydrates as energy. Carbohydrates are our main source of energy. We get some energy from fat in our diet, and maybe these days actually fats become probably a bigger source, or we get more energy from fat than we used to, but carbohydrates are still probably our main source of energy, and they're also probably the largest part of any meal. So when you eat a sandwich, the bread is a source of carbohydrates. When you have a pasta dish, the pasta is basically carbohydrate. When you eat something on rice, the rice is the carbohydrate. When you eat something with potato, the potato is carbohydrate. So every culture and in most places across the world, we generally sort of have some carbohydrate component to our meals, which makes kind of a reasonable component or a decent part of the actual meal. And often we combine that with a bit of meat, a bit of protein, and then some veggies and things too. So carbohydrates really are sort of a staple. You really find them in every culture, whether it's rice, potatoes, wheat, which makes bread and flour and pasta and all those sorts of things. We all seem to have, or corn, we all have some sort of carbohydrate that's a real staple in our diet. So carbohydrates are our main source of energy, and there are three types though. There are sugars. Sugar is a type of carbohydrate, and sugar is found in sweets and fruit and honey, things like that. Anything that tastes sweet. So, you know, guys, if you're asked in a test for an example of something that's high in sugar, just think of anything you can think of that's really sweet. Starch, so that's the sort of the main carbohydrate or one of the main carbohydrates we run on or we get a lot of our energy from, and that's found in things like rice, potato, bread, pasta. Bread and pasta are basically made from flour, so from wheat. Corn is another kind of quite starchy food, so think like corn chips or cornbread, or in Mexico a lot of the, you know, in South America, you know, a lot of foods are made from corn. That's one of their main starch groups. Fiber is found in kind of fruits and especially vegetables, mainly vegetables. A little bit of fiber in grains too, especially whole grains. And fiber basically helps move food through your intestines. Fiber is something we can't actually digest. It's a type of carbohydrate that we can't really digest or break it down, so it just kind of goes through us. And that might sound a bit funny. Why is fiber important if it just goes through us? It doesn't really add anything nutritionally. Well, it helps the food move through our intestines, and it helps keep you regular. So it helps make sure you're not constipated or don't have diarrhea. Helps make sure that the food moves through, and it also helps in that way to kind of clean out the intestines or protect them from sort of damaging wastes. And so it's been shown that if you have a high fiber diet, you're less likely to get cancer in your large intestine or colon, basically because you're getting rid of those wastes better, and you're cleaning out your intestines a bit better. Okay, so those are the three types of carbohydrates: sugar, starch, and fiber. Three types of carbohydrates, and sugar and starch are sort of our main sources of energy. If we look at the connection between them, starch and fiber are actually just made out of hundreds of sugar molecules all stuck together. So you can see here sugar, I've drawn it as little hexagons, and I'll explain why it's little hexagons. But starch or fiber is just a long chain of sugar. That's really all it is. So if we piece together the sugars, we get a long chain. It's going to be either starch or fiber. And it depends a little bit on the types. There are slightly different types of sugar, or how we piece them together. Sometimes you get branching chains rather than just one long straight chain, whether it's starch or fiber, but we're not going to worry too much about that at this level. At this level, all I want you guys to know is that starch and fiber are really just long chains of sugar sort of stuck together. Alright, so let's just look at sugar, and I said I'd tell you why we draw it as these little hexagons. Sugar molecules are actually made out of a carbon ring with oxygen and hydrogen atoms attached. So if you look here, this is a carbon ring. You can see there's an oxygen in here, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons, and the sixth one sticks up. So it's a hexagon ring of carbons. There's one oxygen in there and an extra carbon that kind of sticks up. So this is actually, I should say, glucose. There are slightly different types of sugar. This one's called glucose. That's probably one of the most common, or at least one of the types of sugar you'd probably hear the most about, and one of probably the most important ones. So you'll learn a lot more about glucose when you get into the senior levels. So you don't need to know this big complicated structure here. You don't need to know that one, but it's worth mentioning. It's worth having a quick look at it. You'll see it's actually, like I said, 6 carbons. If you count up the number of oxygens and hydrogens, it's basically this. There's basically 2 hydrogens for every oxygen, which if you think about it is kind of the formula for water, H2O. So a sugar molecule is really made out of carbon and water. And if we write out the formula just like this, C6H12O6, so we've got 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens in a molecule of glucose. You can actually see here it's kind of like 6 carbons, and then 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. We've got twice as many hydrogens as oxygens. That's basically the formula for water. Alright, so you can see here it's like we've got 6 water molecules, 12 and 6. So C6H12O6, and that's one of the reasons it's called carbohydrates. It's hydrated carbon. Alright, we've got water attached to carbon. And actually, if we look at the carbons around this ring, look at this carbon here, we've got an OH on this side and an H on this side. And on the next carbon, we've got an OH on this side and an H on this side. So we've kind of split water and stuck it onto a carbon. One of the reasons it's called carbohydrate. But if you actually go through your regular naming rules that we learned in our chemistry topic, okay, if we look at this, the name of this molecule, carbon, hydro, and remember if we've got oxygen in there as well, the ending changes to ate. So carbohydrate, carbohydrate. So it is actually just following our regular naming rules too, carbohydrate. Alright, so the ending changing to ate because of the oxygen. So this is sugar. It's basically a little ring molecule, and like I said, if you want an example of something that's got sugar in it, basically anything that tastes sweet. So that's it, guys. Those are the 3 major groups, food groups. We've got carbohydrates, lipids, and fats. And like I said, some textbooks might include water and vitamins and minerals. I wouldn't really include those as a food group. I don't really consider them as a food, largely because they're not really a source of energy or as a building block, but they are things that we need too. So we might mention especially the vitamins and minerals quickly in one of the later tutorials. But these are the major food groups: carbohydrates, lipids, and fats. Carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Carbohydrates, just remember there's the 2 types there. You've got sugars, which are basically just the little pieces on their own, and starch and fiber, which are basically long chains stuck together. So there you go, that's it. The 3 groups one more time. We had lipids, which are fats and oils, proteins, and carbohydrates. Cool. Alright, on to the next one.